The scent of smoke curled through the crisp morning air, acrid and unmistakable. Jake's heart pounded as he stepped onto his front porch, his eyes locking onto the smoldering remains in his yard. The flag, his flag, was nothing but charred fabric and blackened threads, still hissing as the last embers fought for life. He clenched his fists, his breath caught between disbelief and fury. It wasn't just any flag. This was the American flag his grandfather, a decorated veteran, had given him before he passed. A symbol of service, sacrifice and family honor. The deep blue, the bold stripes, the stars that had waved proudly outside his home, it was all gone. Reduced to ashes. And then he saw her. Karen stood across the street, arms folded, an infuriating smirk tugging at the corner of her lips. The self-appointed queen of the homeowners association, she thrived on enforcing petty rules, delighting in making people bend to her will. Her icy blonde bob barely moved in the breeze as she tilted her head, watching him with the satisfaction of a cat playing with a trapped mouse. "I see you finally noticed," she called, her voice dripping with false concern. "That flag was a violation of the HOA guidelines. You should really review the handbook." Jake's jaw tightened, his nails digging into his palms. "You burned it," he said, barely able to force the words through his clenched teeth. She let out a theatrical sigh. "Well, technically, I had it removed, and since it was abandoned property on a common area, it was disposed of accordingly." Her eyes flicked to the pile of ash. Fire was just the most efficient method. A cold rage settled in Jake's chest, heavier than any anger he'd felt before. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a warning or a simple fine. She had destroyed something sacred, something irreplaceable, and she was enjoying every second of it. The other neighbors had started to gather, drawn by the commotion. Some whispered amongst themselves, casting uneasy glances toward Karen. Others stood frozen, unwilling to intervene, afraid of the consequences. Everyone knew what happened when you crossed Karen. Mysterious fines appeared in mailboxes, service requests were mysteriously delayed, and sometimes, properties even ended up under review for violations no one had ever heard of. Jake took a slow step forward. "That flag was on my property." Karen rolled her eyes. "Technically, your porch extends into HOA-governed space, and the guidelines strictly prohibit unapproved exterior displays. I sent you multiple warnings. I have them documented." She waved a manicured hand as if brushing away his protest. "You should be thanking me. You would have been fined otherwise." Jake's pulse thundered in his ears. "You think you can just do whatever you want? That flag meant something. You had no right." "Oh, please," she cut in, exasperated. "It's just a flag. It's not like I burned down your house." A murmur of discomfort rippled through the small crowd. Even those who feared her seemed taken aback. Jake forced himself to breathe to keep his voice steady. "That flag belonged to my grandfather. He served in 2 wars. That was his, and now it's gone because of you." For the briefest moment, Karen's smirk faltered. Then just as quickly she scoffed. "Well, maybe he should have read the HOA rules too." A sharp, ugly silence settled between them. The weight of her words pressed into Jake's ribs, but he wouldn't let her see it. He turned his back to her, crouching beside the pile of ash. He reached down, sifting through the remains, searching for anything that had survived. His fingers closed around a fragment of fabric, brittle and blackened, and a lump rose in his throat. A quiet voice broke the silence. "This isn't right." Jake looked up. It was Mrs. Delgado, an older woman from 2 houses down. She clutched her cardigan tightly, glancing between him and Karen. "That was an American flag. You can't just destroy something like that." Karen's smile thinned. "Mrs. Delgado, I understand you have sentimental concerns, but we have rules for a reason. If we allow one flag, then someone else will want to put up something ridiculous. Where do we draw the line?" A few murmurs of agreement. A few nods. But there were also shifting feet, uneasy glances. Karen had ruled this neighborhood like a dictator for years, but this was different. Jake stood slowly, dusting the ashes from his hands. "You broke the law," he said quietly. Karen's expression flickered, just for a second. Then she laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound. "Oh, give me a break. What law?" Jake locked eyes with her. "Burning someone's personal property. Destroying an American flag that doesn't belong to you. Federal law protects homeowners from HOA overreach when it comes to displaying the flag. You might want to look that up." The smirk on her face didn't fade, but something in her eyes shifted. Annoyance. A hint of uncertainty. But then she shrugged. "Oh, please. Take it up with the board if you're so upset." I have better things to do. She turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the pavement, confident, untouchable. Jake exhaled slowly, his fists still clenched. He could let this go. He could let her walk away, let her believe she'd won. Or he could fight. He looked at the faces around him. Some avoided his gaze, unwilling to pick a side. But others, Mrs. Delgado, a few younger couples, even the retired Marine who lived across the street, watched with quiet support. Karen had gone too far. And he wasn't about to let her get away with it. Jake sat at his kitchen table, the burned fragment of his grandfather's flag resting beside his laptop. His fingers drummed against the desk as he read through legal articles, his vision blurring with anger. Federal law was clear. Homeowners had the right to display the American flag regardless of HOA rules. Destroying someone else's flag? That was another issue entirely. He wasn't a lawyer, but even he could see the potential legal ramifications. He exhaled slowly, pushing away from the desk. He needed a second opinion. The next morning he found himself in the office of Paul Reinhardt, a local attorney and an old friend of his grandfather's. The office smelled like leather and coffee, a clutter of legal books stacked haphazardly across the desk. Paul adjusted his glasses as he skimmed through the printouts Jake had brought. "She burned your flag?" Paul asked, glancing up. Jake nodded. Had it removed first. Claimed it was an eyesore. Then torched it like she was disposing of garbage. Paul frowned, leaning back in his chair. She overstepped, no question about that. Homeowners associations have power, but not this much. There are federal laws protecting flag displays on private property. More importantly, this is destruction of personal property. Jake's jaw tightened. So I can sue? You can, but a civil lawsuit would take time, and there's a chance the HOA board might try to cover for her. If you want fast results, you need something stronger, something that pressures her into backing down. Paul paused, then smirked. What if I told you she's already broken more than one law? Jake sat forward. Go on. Paul tapped a pen against the desk. Flag desecration itself isn't necessarily illegal. Strange but true. However, burning someone else's property? That's a crime. And given that this was an American flag, that might interest some higher authorities. Jake felt a flicker of hope. Like who? Paul leaned forward, a glint in his eye. Local law enforcement. Maybe even a few news outlets. A slow grin crept across Jake's face. By the time he left Paul's office, he had a plan. It wasn't just about legal action anymore. Karen had humiliated him, laughed in his face, and made it clear she thought she was untouchable. That was about to change. That evening, Jake walked into the HOA meeting with purpose. The community center was packed, neighbors seated in stiff plastic chairs as Karen presided over the group like a queen surveying her court. Her expression barely shifted when she saw him, though her lips curled into a smug little smile. Jake, she said with exaggerated politeness. Here to learn about proper HOA guidelines? He ignored the jab and took a seat near the front. The meeting dragged through its usual agenda. Landscaping rules, parking violations, a tedious discussion about mailbox uniformity, before Karen finally asked, "Any new business?" Jake stood. The room quieted. "I'd like to discuss the destruction of my property." Karen sighed dramatically. "Jake, we've been over this." "No," he said firmly. "You talked and I listened. Now it's my turn." He turned to the audience. "What if it had been your property? Your decorations? Your memorials? What if someone decided your home didn't fit their vision, and destroyed something meaningful to you?" A few murmurs. Karen's jaw tensed. Jake reached into his pocket and pulled out a printed document. "Here's the law. Federal regulations specifically state that homeowners associations cannot prohibit the display of the American flag. More importantly, destroying private property is a criminal offense. And since this was an American flag, well, that's something law enforcement takes seriously." Karen's face paled just slightly before she forced a laugh. "Jake, really, you're making this into some grand injustice when all I did was enforce the rules." Paul had warned him she'd try this, make it seem petty, make him look irrational. He didn't take the bait. "I've already spoken to an attorney," he continued, keeping his voice calm, "and I'm considering my legal options. I also contacted a few veteran organizations. They're very interested in what happened." The murmurs grew louder. A few heads turned toward Karen, their expressions shifting. Karen straightened. "You wouldn't dare." Jake met her gaze. "Wouldn't I?" For the first time, her confidence wavered. Then, from the back of the room, a voice spoke up. "I think he should." All heads turned to Mr. Thompson, a retired Marine who had lived in the neighborhood for over 20 years. He stood slowly, his gaze locked onto Karen's. I served for that flag. A lot of good men did. And you think you can just burn it because you don't like how it looks? He shook his head. That's not leadership. That's power tripping. More voices rose in agreement. Mrs. Delgado nodded, muttering something under her breath. Even a few board members shifted uncomfortably. Karen's smile tightened. This meeting is over. She grabbed her gavel, but before she could slam it down, the doors opened. 2 uniformed officers stepped inside. The air in the room seemed to thicken. Karen froze, her fingers gripping the podium. Karen Whitmore? One of the officers asked, holding up a clipboard. Her throat bobbed as she forced another smile. Yes. We received a report about the destruction of personal property. We'd like to ask you a few questions. The silence was deafening. Jake watched as Karen's mask cracked, her usual smugness replaced with something else, fear. And just like that, the tide had turned. Karen's carefully curated composure wavered as the officers stepped further into the room. The shift in energy was palpable. Just moments ago, she had been the one wielding control, ruling over the neighborhood with an iron grip. Now, with the weight of the law pressing in on her, that control was slipping through her fingers like sand. This is absolutely unnecessary, she said, forcing a brittle laugh. I was simply enforcing the HOA guidelines. If people have a problem with that, they should have taken it up with the board, not the police. One of the officers, a stocky man with a clipped tone, flipped through his notes. Ma'am, we're here to address a complaint regarding the destruction of personal property. Namely, a U.S. flag that belonged to Mr. Reynolds. He nodded toward Jake, who stood still, his arms crossed. Karen scoffed, though her voice lacked its usual confidence. I already told everyone, I was following the rules. That flag was an unauthorized display, and it was removed according to HOA policy. Officer Martinez, the other cop, a woman with sharp, assessing eyes, spoke next. And then you burned it? The air in the room thickened. Karen's lips parted slightly, her breath catching just a fraction before she recovered. Well, yes. But only because it was discarded. It wasn't on anyone's property anymore. It was in a communal area. Jake took a slow step forward. That's a lie. That flag was on my property attached to my porch. You had it removed without notice, without permission. Then you destroyed it. He let his voice harden, allowing every ounce of anger and betrayal to seep into his words. That wasn't just some decoration to me. That flag belonged to my grandfather, a veteran who served this country. And you burned it like trash. Murmurs rippled through the gathered neighbors, the weight of Jake's words pressing down on everyone in the room. Officer Martinez didn't break eye contact with Karen. Destruction of personal property is a serious matter, Ms. Whitmore. Given that the property in question was a U.S. flag, this incident could also fall under the jurisdiction of federal protections regarding flag desecration. Karen's face lost a shade of color. Oh, come on, she snapped. This is ridiculous. I'm being persecuted for enforcing neighborhood regulations? Enforcing regulations doesn't mean you're above the law, Officer Martinez countered smoothly. If the board wanted to issue a citation, that would have been one thing. But you chose to destroy something that didn't belong to you. That's not just an HOA matter anymore. The room had gone eerily silent. Some neighbors looked away, not wanting to get caught in the crossfire. Others, those who had been at the mercy of Karen's reign of terror, watched with barely concealed satisfaction. Jake could see the panic creeping into her expression, the way her eyes darted toward the other board members, searching for support. But none of them spoke up. Not this time. She squared her shoulders. I want my lawyer, she said stiffly. Officer Martinez nodded. That's your right. But in the meantime, we'll need you to come with us to answer some questions at the station. Karen's mouth opened, then snapped shut. It was the first time Jake had ever seen her speechless. The officer stepped forward, and though she wasn't being arrested, not yet, the very image of Karen Whitmore being escorted out of the HOA meeting by uniformed officers was something no one in the room would soon forget. As the doors closed behind them, a long silence stretched through the room. Then slowly Mrs. Delgado started clapping. One by one, others joined in, the sound swelling until it filled the entire space. Jake exhaled, letting the tension drain from his shoulders. It wasn't over. Not yet. But for the first time since this nightmare had started, he knew one thing for certain. Karen had finally lost. The days following Karen's very public humiliation were a whirlwind. News of her being escorted out by the police spread like wildfire, not just in the neighborhood but beyond. Someone had recorded the entire interaction on their phone, and within hours the footage was circulating on local social media pages. It didn't take long for it to catch the attention of a veterans organization, and soon conservative news outlets were picking up the story. Karen Whitmore, HOA president, had burned a veteran's flag. Jake didn't have to do anything after that. The internet did it for him. The HOA board scrambled to distance themselves from the scandal, issuing a statement that Karen had acted alone and without their approval. It was a desperate move, no one really believed them, but it was enough to send a clear message. Karen was on her own. And she knew it. 2 days after the meeting, a for sale sign appeared in front of Karen's house. It stood there like a quiet surrender, its presence louder than any words she could have spoken. Jake saw her standing on her porch later that evening, her arms crossed, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. She wasn't the same smug, untouchable tyrant she had been a week ago. She looked smaller somehow. Defeated. For a brief moment he almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then he remembered the smirk on her face as she burned his grandfather's flag. The memory hardened his resolve. Justice wasn't about feeling sorry for the people who got what they deserved. It was about making sure they never did it again. A knock at his door pulled him from his thoughts. When he opened it, Mr. Thompson stood there, his posture as straight as ever, his sharp eyes studying Jake. Without a word, the older man extended something toward him. It was an American flag. Jake hesitated. "Sir, Mr. Thompson cut him off with a firm nod. "A flag like yours should never have been taken from you in the first place. And I reckon every man who's ever fought for that flag would want you to raise another one." Emotion thickened in Jake's throat as he took the fabric in his hands. He swallowed hard and gave a small nod of his own. The next morning, just as the sun broke over the horizon, Jake secured the new flag to the front of his house. The material rippled in the breeze, catching the early morning light, its red, white, and blue standing out vividly against the clear sky. Karen saw it as she pulled out of her driveway, her car loaded with moving boxes. For the first time in her life she had nothing to say. And for Jake, that silence was the sweetest victory of all.